This is the Elite Sport Mentality Podcast with me, Tom Evans. Welcome to the Elite Sport Mentality Podcast, where we'll be exploring all things sports psychology. Whether you're an athlete, coach, or sports enthusiast, this podcast is your go-to resource for understanding the mental side to sports performance. Each episode, I'll be talking to someone from the world of sport or sports psychology to get their insights into the mental side of their sport. We'll delve into the latest research, share inspiring stories from top athletes, and provide practical tips to you to enhance your mental skills. Join me as I look to unlock the secrets to an elite sport mentality. Let's go. Hi, and welcome to the Elite Sport Mentality Podcast with me, Tom Evans. And today we're joined by a good friend of mine, Dr. Dom Edwards. So just a quick intro and then I'll get you to go through in more detail, Dom. So you're a very experienced coach, football coach at BUCS levels in women's football academies, also a lecturer and program manager across higher education, including some sports coaching degrees, and then alongside that you completed your PhD in youth international transitions. So welcome, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. So let's start off then, I always try and get the guests to just give us a bit of an overview of their journey today. So can you talk me through your journey today with regards to your career within sport and elite sport?
Okay, so I started coaching when I was around 15, 16 years old. So I got my level 1 at that time, and I was just doing some voluntary work, which down in Cornwall, where I'm from. So getting involved in local grassroots football and ended up working for the Cornwall FA development centres down there. So mainly specialising in 5 to 11-year-old coaching. And then I went to university, so I went up to Liverpool and I started coaching up there. So I was doing some bits and bobs for Everton in the community, working in primary schools, development centres before graduating. And then I worked full-time for the FA. So I was a 5 to 11-year-old specialist coach there, which was a really good opportunity to be around, really like-minded people who wanted to grow, wanted to develop, and were really passionate about coaching. So mainly working within the grassroots. So it's very similar to what I was doing previously, where I was working in school environments where you've got 30 kids in one tiny school hall and you have to be able to engage them, which is a real challenge for any coach. And then we used to run our own development centres as well as mentoring and supporting grassroots coaches as well within the local communities. From there, I left and actually went to Loughborough University to do my master's in sports coaching. So I coached the Loughborough University football teams, a variety of different teams whilst I was at the university, and also worked for Leicester City's academy within the foundation phase. So that's like the 9s, 10s, 11s at that point. Upon leaving there, I then moved down to London. So I worked for Tottenham Hotspur, where I did the academy education, delivered on their degree program, and also coached the BUCS University football program that we ran out of Tottenham Hotspur. And then I left there, came to West Ham, which is currently where I'm working at the moment. I've been here for around 5 years now, and I've spent a few seasons working with the West Ham women under-16 squads. Alongside that, though, a couple of years working with the Arsenal women under-16 squads. So work with players there who've been international footballers or currently are international footballers within the youth level, which is brilliant. But my day job is, as you mentioned, higher education manager, focusing on sports coaching and performance, so specialising really in the coaching side of it. But my PhD, as you alluded to, is all based around youth international scope. So what sort of structures and frameworks can we put in place to help support young people when they move from either being a club athlete to an international athlete? That's kind of the real focus of it. So I focus on football. So you might have people who maybe play for West Ham in the under-18s, under-16s, for example, but they also then might get called up and play international football, potentially for England or any other national governing body or any other nation as well. And then what does that transition look like, and what support maybe could we as a club, but also the national governing body, what can we put in place to help ensure that transition is as smooth as possible?
Lovely. So really kind of thorough history with regards to your coaching. And in particular, I know with Arsenal women's, you've had some real good success within that realm as well. So, in looking at your PhD more specifically, then that's quite obviously a niche area to look into with regards to transition specifically. So, where did that come from? Like, where did that kind of interest come from, and what made you want to look into that area more, and to be able to help athletes and coaches with those moments?
I think it actually came out of when I was talking to some of the players on the under 18 program at Tottenham. So I was teaching their education program, but when a player would get called up to England, I remember some players would come back, and the players who didn't get called up would say, "Oh, when they come back, they're different. Oh, we called it the England effect." And I thought that was really interesting, because I wondered actually whether that was the case, whether anyone did change, or whether they did think differently about themselves, or whether they could see themselves in a different light potentially by having that international call up. So that just got me interested really in terms of the life journeys, if you like, of sporting athletes. And that's something that I started to study myself as a coach, mainly thinking at that time around the youth to senior transition. So how do we actually support people to move into senior sport? Because that's such an important factor. If we get that wrong, we're probably going to have a high level of dropout rate. But then actually through the study, and very similar to a lot of people that would have done PhDs, you start off with an idea and then you end up moving in a different direction. So when I started to do my basic literature review at the beginning of the project, it was going to be youth to senior, but because there was so much already published within that area, particularly within the world of football, I felt there was probably a better option to go down the route of something a little bit different. And I've always been really passionate about international sport. And I think it's something which is most young people would love to represent their nation, whichever nation they would represent. And I think that it's probably an area which it was very underrepresented within the research, but also something which I think is very well understood within outside of academia, sort of practically.
Yeah, brilliant. And then you speak a lot. Obviously, your focus is around that international transition, and probably the transition that people think of the most when they think of transitions in sport is the retirement transition of stopping being an athlete anymore, or someone coming out of the game. So what other transitions do you think, obviously I know you have your focus, but what other transitions do you think that athletes will experience along their career? Are they all kind of massive ones like international call-ups in retirements, or is there kind of like micro transitions that they might be experienced along the way as well?
Yeah, most definitely. So you'll have those normative transitions, which everyone will go through. So the transition from primary school into secondary school into college or into university, for example. The majority of people will probably be moving through that. But within that as well, you might have almost those non-normative transitions. So it could be injury. So in a team sport setting, in football, for example, which is where I work, it could be so difficult socially if you get your injury. Suddenly you can't be training with the squad. So you have that real social side of the transition as well, and maybe what support's required to help you in those moments. And then there's a transition back into the squad as well, maybe after rehab and after recovery from injury. You've also got areas such as migratory transitions. So if somebody, for example, maybe wants to move over to the States, they want to study in the States, and they're going to get some sort of sports scholarship. That could be a brilliant opportunity for development, but it's also a huge cultural transition, and something which probably people can struggle to adapt to. I know from my experiences working with young footballers who maybe don't get offered contracts in the UK and they decide to go to the States and study. I can give you several people who've actually decided to come back within 2-3 months just because of it being quite difficult for them to adapt to those situations, and the organizations in these countries maybe not putting the support in place to help someone transition to that new environment. Retirement you touched upon there, really important. Youth to senior, really important. But also maybe the transitions as well in terms of who might support you at different points. So up to the ages of around sort of 12, 13 years old, it might be your parents, your family that are there as your kind of key support network. But as you get to those ages, you get slightly older as well, it becomes your peers and your coaches. They're the ones that become really important. So you have that almost transition of moving away from your family as a support network to now having a wider, more broader support network with people maybe outside of your close circle, if that makes sense. So how do we as coaches start to recognize that and recognize the importance that we maybe place for that athlete as well in their development?
Yeah, that's a really good one, because I think a lot of the listeners or people watching this will be DICE athletes. So DICE is an education program for 16 to 18-year-olds for elite athletes who, like I say, in that 16 to 18-year-old period, they're probably becoming their own, bit more resourceful, a bit more autonomous in the way that they're kind of looking after themselves and moving away from relying on their parents as much. So it'll be really interesting to kind of get your take on things that they can do, or maybe strategies that they can implement to make that easier. But before we kind of move into that, what across all of those transitions, they spoke really well about the load of micro transitions and bigger transitions. Is there kind of common psychological kind of themes that crop up regardless of the transition? So whether you're moving into an international setup, or whether you're retiring from football, or whether you're just moving into a different club or a different squad, did you find there was kind of recurring themes with regards to like increasing anxiety and loneliness and stuff like that, or is it quite different depending on the transition?
It can be slightly different depending on the transition, but also the key thing is it's different depending on the person. So if you look at certain transitions like the club to country, or moving from let's say you're maybe a track athlete participating or competing for your local club, and then you're going to then start to represent Team GB, you've now got two different organisations that want a little bit of you. There's two people that maybe have got their own ideas. So you've got your coach back at your club. Maybe you've got some coaching staff with Team GB, for example. They've got different ideas now on what maybe you need to do to get better. Maybe they've got different ideas on where they see you going. They've definitely got different ideas on you as a person, because maybe your club coach has maybe known you for a little bit longer, but your international coach maybe hasn't known you for as long, and that can be a little bit different as well. So you almost need that history with your coaching staff, which can be quite difficult to get very quickly. So there's those aspects as well, and that's something which I think is probably downplayed. We would call it in literature terms like you've got two different policy actors, you've got two different people that want maybe different things. So for you as the athlete, you might need clarity, and it's great if you're sort of a 16 to 18-year-old athlete. It'd be really good if you said to your club coach, what do you want from me? What's the goals? Where can you see me heading? And if you were lucky enough, or you've worked hard enough to get maybe that Team GB call, or an England Youth International call, if it's in hockey or whatever sport it might be, then again, it would be a really good thing to actually say to those coaches and those coaching staff as well. Ask them a question. What do you see? How do you see me as an athlete? How do you see me as a player? Because that helps you then understand where you stand. I think obviously you touched upon there the social side and sort of the social anxiety. There were some really good stories that some of the players told me when I was interviewing them for my PhD, where they'd be an under 18 athlete who hasn't played for the first team before, and then they get called up to the England under 18s as an example, and within that squad you've got 5 or 6 players that have played first team football. So if you think back a few years ago, when I was sort of doing the research, one of the lads was saying, Bukayo Saka is in my squad, and he's played for Arsenal, and he's done really well, and I know who he is. So there's almost this kind of like this social side of it as well, where within this mixed group now, these like social hierarchies appear, and that's normal, because that's always going to happen wherever you are. But I think, for any athletes watching this, you have to remember that you're in those situations because of your ability, and you can only focus on yourself. And I think what happens quite a lot of is, particularly if we look at the international side, you get called up and you believe in yourself and you really enjoy it and you're really proud of yourself and your family are really proud. You get to the environment and you're now in a squad with people who are playing Premier League football. They're within the first team, or you might even perceive them as famous because you've followed them on social media for a couple of years, and now you're in the same squad as them. And maybe people have that almost inferiority complex of saying, well, I'm not as good as them, when actually people need to remember where they stand and what their journey looks like. So you might not be with the first team yet, but you're in this situation for a very good reason. And not everyone's going to have the Bukayo Saka story and rise to the top early in their careers. Everyone's on a different journey, which I think is really important. And the final thing I was just going to say on that around the social development, it can be difficult to be potentially the big dog. So let's say you're at a small athletics club in South London, and you're the best athlete that is at that club. Suddenly, the athletics club down the road that's a lot bigger, they now want you to come and join them and compete for them, because they feel like you'll be a good athlete and you'll be able to offer something for them. And you go and join them, and now you're the little fish in the big pond. but before you were the big fish in the small pond. And that saying, I think, is really important in transitions, because you need to be aware that you're still the same athlete. And it's not a case of saying, the environment will dictate the athlete that you are. You are still the same athlete. And I think people need to be consistently reminded of that, so by their coaches or by their friends and families as well.
Yeah, we have it quite a lot on the DICE program. It'll be a common thing, like you say, throughout all sports. But like, for example, you say like someone coming from an athletics club down in South London will then drag them up into a DICE program with people all around the country, or from athletes or from all around the country who are really, really high standard, whether it's netball or hockey, where we do that. They do it quite consistently on the DICE program, and obviously that will happen away from DICE as well. So that's really good messages, what you say about you're still the same athlete, and it's conversations that I have with athletes quite a lot about reminding yourself of what do you bring to the team, or what do I bring to the setup, reminding yourself why have I been selected, what are the skills and qualities that I possess that mean that I've been given this opportunity. So with that in mind, and thinking that we will have a lot of people hopefully listening to this that have experienced that at some degree, what would your kind of advice be to them about kind of navigating those stressful moments of being dragged into a bigger club or dragged into a bigger setup where you're now not the best, or potentially not the best, and there are people that you're kind of vying for that sort of dominance with?
I think really simply is focus on yourself and set yourself targets, set yourself your own goals. You might not even have to amend them based on where you were, because you're probably thinking 1 year, 2 year, up to 4 years if you're thinking about Olympic cycles, but you're thinking in advance anyway. So it's just focusing on yourself and not worrying about the noise and the other people, or comparing yourself to other people. I think this is one of the biggest problems or most difficult things for young people, isn't it, in terms of social media use, for example, comparing yourself to others. We do it daily, all of us do it, but in these environments where you're moving club, or you're moving into a DICE program, or you're going to a large organization like Loughborough, for example, you need to go in open-minded. You need to go in thinking, I'm in the right place that's going to help me grow and help me develop. That's really, really important. And focus on yourself, and just don't focus on other people, I think.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so bringing a focus onto yourself and what you can impact and stuff is obviously really important, isn't it? So talk to me a little bit more about your research, and in particularly, was there any like interesting parts of the research that obviously I'd imagine it was all interesting to yourself, but was there any interesting parts to it that you got in mind that you could share with us? Anything that you thought was quite interesting that you could kind of share with us with regards to transitions and people going through it, but also how to support people going through transition?
I think the key thing around support is consistent communication and consistent support. So if you're going to become an international athlete, you might not be working with those international coaches very often. And that can be quite hard to build relationships. So from like a coaching perspective, if you're a coach, you want to be able to build strong relationships so you can help support that person to the best of your ability. And if you're an athlete, from an athlete perspective, you want the coach to basically show that they care. That's the key thing. But that can be really hard to do on a short-term basis. So, from a football perspective, you might only be with the international group for around 54 days a year, something like that. And the same thing from if you're a track athlete, or if you're working with sort of within this Team GB environment. You're not going to be working with those coaches all the time in certain sports. Some sports you might be, but not all sports. So I think it's about building relationships and for the coaches to know that they care. So some of the people that I interviewed would basically say, I felt like I was just a bit of a pawn. I got the opportunity to go and play and represent my country, but actually I don't feel like they cared about me. I was kind of there to make up the numbers, and I did a few camps and they dropped me, never gave me any feedback, and that was it. And that was quite a negative experience that they had, and that was relatively common. Not just within those that played for England, for other countries. And I think that, so if you're an athlete, it's really thinking about, if those opportunities, if those things happen to you, what could you do about it to make the most of those opportunities? Because that can happen. You might get called up, you transition into this brand new environment, but then there also could be some form of deselection. So if there's some form of deselection, then how do you deal with that? So it could be a case of, we get frustrated and we get angry and we say, I don't want to get called up again if it's sport. Or we could actually shift it and go, okay, that's fine. I'm going to go to them and I'm going to ask them for feedback. When I receive that feedback, I'm going to action it and I'm going to try to apply it to my practice, my game, my whatever it is. And then I'm going to try to make sure that I do get called up again. There's two different ways you can go about it. And that links back to what I said earlier about your goals. If you set yourself some goals and you say, I want to become a Team GB athlete, you probably, if you got deselected, you probably want to go back and get some feedback then if you weren't given any. And if you are given feedback, you probably want to action it because they're the people that are going to select you next time. And that's something which is really important to, I think, to think about.
Yeah, and I think I've had those conversations before when obviously so many different selections and squads across different sports. So it's kind of impossible to make them all. At some point, you're going to, as an athlete, they're going to deal with that kind of experience of being rejected from a squad or deselected from a squad. And I'm always encouraging them to kind of, okay, yeah, but obviously work on the positive, work on what you need to work on. Did they give you feedback? So you know what you need to do better next time. But sometimes, like I say, they don't get that feedback, which is really difficult because that kind of solution, that control the controllable thing that we want to push them towards, they haven't got that to work on. So what would your advice be to an athlete who's maybe experienced that? So they've gone to an international kind of trial or they've been part of a squad and then they've had that experience, that quite negative experience of maybe being deselected and without any real feedback and without any sort of conversation with a coach. Would you have any kind of advice to people in that situation where maybe that feedback isn't readily available to them?
I think you made a really good point. Everyone will get deselected at some point. So you can look at the England team from the men's side now in football, and players like Raheem Sterling have been brilliant players for England, but they haven't been selected in recent squads. And he's a top elite level player. It happens to every athlete at some point in their careers. So at the younger ages, if you get deselected, it's never the end. It's just a part of your journey. And particularly when you think about international sport, you always go in and out. Very rarely does any athlete come in at the ages of 15, 16, and they go all the way up the age groups. Then they do senior sport and then compete at the highest level, win Olympic gold, etc. That doesn't happen. Everyone has some form of a setback, and the setback is there probably for a reason. It's probably there because at that point you weren't ready, and that's okay. And I think it's just the idea really of trying to understand that and take that on board, which can be hard to digest and to understand. You could also speak to your track coaches, or say track, but as the example, but you could speak to your club coaches and you can say to them, what is it you think that I need to work on? They'll have their ideas and you continue to work. You could also ask them, can you please go and speak to the international coaches? Can you find out some more information for me? Can you find out maybe what I might need to do to get another look, to get another opportunity? These things come up, and in terms of sort of, it shouldn't just be on you to ask these questions. It's great if you feel comfortable to do that, but your club coaches can also do that as well.
No, that's really, really good, actually. And I think we work with athletes, and there'll be athletes who listen to this from very different sports. So some team sports where you might think you've got a bit more of that, obviously, that team cohesion, and you're going through with it with other people. But then we've got people from athletics backgrounds who very individual sports who might feel a bit more isolated through these moments. So utilising your coaches, because I say this to athletes all the time, but your coaches are never going to turn you away. If you're asking to have a conversation about how you can develop, how you can get better, any coach that's worth their salt is going to absolutely love and relish that opportunity to have that conversation with you. So although it might seem quite a scary thing, I think it's regardless of age, really. Like, even if you're a bit of an older athlete and have been around the block a little bit, like, those conversations aren't easy to have, because sometimes you might hear things that you don't want to hear. You might get feedback that you didn't expect, that things that they think you need to work on that you didn't expect. But I'm always kind of stressing that the coach will absolutely love to work with an athlete who wants to get better and wants to kind of improve on their weaknesses or areas of development. So yeah, definitely from a recommendation point of view, is have those conversations is kind of the overarching kind of theme to that, I suppose. So then, with it going back to your research, then, so obviously you've completed your PhD now, and the research along the way has been kind of published. So what came out of that research that you think could be really applicable to supporting athletes across any kind of sport through those transitions? What were kind of the key themes that came out of that research that you think are going to help athletes moving forward?
I think, like lots of research, like sometimes you look at research and you think, I don't understand that, it doesn't make sense to me. But really what they're saying is often really simple. So the simple thing around transitions is having open, clear conversations and making sure they're consistent. So if you have someone moving from one moment in their life, one period of their life to another period of their life, the best thing to do at the very beginning is just to check in. So if you're from a coaching perspective, to check in, find out how they're feeling about moving through this process, so then you can know how to support them. So if you're an athlete, it's really important to share your emotions and share your feelings with your coaching staff, with your friends and family as well. You don't have to hold it all in your own mind. So if I was working with a footballer, for example, and let's say they're an under 16 and they're going to move to the under 18s, that's quite a big deal. So let's say they're playing up early. What you would do is you'd have the conversation and go, how do you feel about playing up today? Yeah, I'm a bit nervous about it. Okay, that's fine. It's normal to be nervous, etc. You'd have the conversation. Once they've actually played up, what would you then do? It's, again, pretty obvious. You just have a conversation afterwards and find out how they found it. You just make sure you build those relationships consistently, and you show you care consistently, and you try to have an open dialogue. What you can do in other environments. So if you think back to like when you were little kids, when you were like a year 6, you're like 11 years old. Most primary schools, I don't know if it's happened to you, Tom, they took you to secondary school for like a day, and they showed you what secondary school is like, right? And then you went back to do the rest of year 6 for like the next 4 months. But you went there and you saw it. So it almost gave you that insight in terms of what that new environment is going to be. So it's a bit like having an open day, isn't it? So if we used the analogy earlier, you pick someone out of South London and you go, right, you're going to compete for Loughborough now. But they would have gone there, they would have had a look around, they would make sure they absorb the environment. Even those little tiny things are really helpful for transitions, because often what causes those kind of psychological concerns or causes anxiety is the unknown. So if we reduce the unknown and give people a space to actually discuss what might be coming up, it just makes it so much easier. If you don't do that, that's probably when you're going to have what we would call like a negative transition. So a positive transition, you could say that someone is at some sort of performance level, mentally, physically, athletically. They move into a new environment or a different period or moment of their life. So maybe they've gone up an age group or they're playing for a new organization, whatever. But they're able to maintain that level of athletic and emotional and psychological and sort of performance focus that they had previously. You'd say that's a pretty positive transition. If they move into that new period or that new moment and suddenly we drop off massively in terms of our performance levels in particular, we could probably say that's a negative transition. We want people to have positive transitions, not only athletically, so we can say we're developing people and athletes, but also just for them as people.
Yeah, brilliant. I think it's really interesting what you're talking about there, because when we think of players or athletes going into a different setup, so you might be getting called up to international or some sort of squad or something, that from a coach or someone who's trying to support someone in that, you in one hand, you don't want them to be stressed by it, you don't want them to be worried about it. So you don't maybe thinking, I don't want to make it such a big deal to them. But then on the other hand, it is a big deal, and it is like it's an international, like it could be an international call up. So like let's talk about it. Let's talk about what are you feeling and stuff. Let's not just ignore it and try and underplay it. Let's talk about it and like talk about what you're feeling and how you're going to kind of react to it when you get there. Or do you ever work with athletes who have done a bit of leg work before? Or do you think that's something that's important for someone? So if you're not going to get the opportunity to do like an open day, like you say, like to go and experience something before you go, would you encourage athletes to kind of do a bit of homework about, okay, where am I going? Like, what's it look like? What's the environment like? Who are the coaches that are going to be there? A bit of a background check so that when they get there, it's not completely sort of alien to them and all new to them. Do you think that would be worthwhile, or what other technique do you think you could utilize in those moments when you're kind of going to a new place, new setup?
Yeah, definitely. That may help you feel comfortable, most definitely. So just going online, having a look at facilities, making sure you know where you're going, like, that would definitely help. It's really the people, though, that make a difference. So even thinking about if you're going to move into a new environment. So if I'm a coach and I'm going to play someone out of their age group, the way that you could do it is I could then also get someone from their age group to be there up there as well. So there's 2 at a time. Or I could set up some sort of like buddy network. So, if you're going to a new environment, but one person there, you'll feel so much better and you'll be able to hopefully perform at a good level. It's like if you're, a youth athlete and suddenly they go, right, you're called up to the first team today, you're going to come and train with the first team as the first one ever doing it. you're going to be so nervous and so scared. And yeah, you might know who these people are, but you don't know them as people. But if you just knew one other person, because maybe last year you played together in the youth team, and now you're called up the first team and they're there training as well, you'll feel more comfortable. So, you know, you can't always plan for that because you don't know who's going to be there. But if that is the opportunity that you can do that. So if I'm a coach from a coach perspective now, then yeah, you'd do that. You'd make sure that you can help someone feel more comfortable. As an athlete, that could be quite hard. But, you know, you said about research. There's different ways you can find out about people. Sport is a very small world. So if you've got a club coach, they might know someone up there. Maybe you could link in with them and you could ask your parents maybe even to drop a message to them on LinkedIn. You can start to build a relationship. You could have a few different Zoom calls or webinars similar to this, just to have a chat and find out more about it. Like that will help you transition into those new moments a lot easier.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, so not necessarily, even if you don't have the support network, like you say, coaches that might know people there, like utilising things like LinkedIn, like a new way to sort of network and reach out to people would be a really beneficial way, I think, for people going through that. So that's been great so far. And obviously throughout, there's been lots of takeaway messages and little kind of nuggets that people can hopefully take and use for their own situations. But just to finish on them, what would be one kind of piece of takeaway information or an activity that you would get an athlete or coach to do who's listening to this to do afterwards to help them through a transition, or help them maximize and give the best chance of having a positive transition moving forward? Was there one kind of overriding activity or piece of information?
If you're a coach, try to understand what the demands of that transition might be and what the barriers might be for someone transitioning effectively. So if you're a coach and you looked at, let's say it's a player going from youth into senior sport, the barrier could be they're not technically or physically good enough to step up into that environment. That could be one. Obviously, as coaches are working on those things all the time to try to close that gap. But another barrier could be almost the physical side. Are they physically ready to close that gap? You'd work with your wider team to make sure they are. You know, you can do all those different things. But thinking more about the psychosocial side, the barriers can be, as I just mentioned, that they don't know anyone and they might struggle with that. It could be psychologically, are they resilient enough to step up? So what we do as coaches, we look and we go, wow, look, they've scored, 50 goals this year. They're ready to step up to the new age group. It's too easy for them. But they might not be, because socially they just want to be with their mates and they'd rather that, because that's better for their best thing for their development at the moment. So it's thinking about, where are they really at for their development, and are we ready to move them up or not? But that's a key thing. I think from an athlete perspective, it is about what we just spoke about, doing your research beforehand, and being really open with how you feel and having those discussions with people, because that will help you, I think, share your emotions, which are important. And actually thinking about what you think and what you feel are not always the same thing. So sometimes you might think, I'm going to go there, I'm not going to be a very good player, or I'm not going to be at the level. But that's not an emotion, that's not a feeling. Like, try to really think about how do you actually feel about it, and talk about those things with people, because that will help you, I think, deal with the different situations which maybe might be coming up. And then finally, for athletes, don't perceive the transition to be a negative. So any form of transition, like there's an opportunity there. There's probably something really exciting there. This could be the next positive step for you in your career. So I mean, that's the way I want to finish that. Really, is just make sure that you see it as a positive first. Be aware of what the negative demands might be or the barriers might be, and be ready for that. But it's the next step in your career.
No, that's great. There's a really, really important message to finish on. In psychology, we talk about threat or challenge appraisals, and then the way we frame things that we're going to encounter can really impact whether we see it as a threat. And when we see it as a threat, it's where we can potentially hinder performance, or whether we see it as a challenge, we see it as something that we can kind of rise to the occasion for. And like I say, I think transitions is definitely one of those things that potentially people have a bit of a negative connotation of. Their mindset goes into it thinking, okay, I don't want to I don't want to miss out. I don't want to like get deselected, or I don't want the negative side of that opportunity, rather than think about the opportunity itself and the positives that can come from that. And if we can reframe that, then we can hopefully encourage that challenge appraisal rather than the threat appraisal. So I think that's a lovely kind of way to finish on that. So thank you for your time today, Dom. It's been great to look into transitions more. It's obviously something that there's lots and lots of research out there, and a kind of growing part of sports psychology or sports sociology, whichever discipline you want to pin it in. But I appreciate you kind of talking me through it today. So thank you.
Thank you.